The courtroom went silent when the judge looked over the financial statement and said, "Mr. Whitcomb, you appear to have misunderstood the financial position of your wife." My husband stopped smiling. Across the aisle, his attorney shifted in his chair. Behind them, my mother-in-law Judith whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she looked directly at me and the color drained from her face. I kept my hands folded in my lap. The judge turned another page. "According to these records, your wife's net worth is approximately $28.7 million. Judith stood so quickly that her chair scraped the floor. 28 million. Then she collapsed. My husband stared at me as if I had become a stranger. But the strangest part was this: I had never wanted him to know about the money, not because I was ashamed of it. Because 3 weeks earlier, I had still believed I was married to a man who loved me. And that was the day everything changed. 3 weeks before that courtroom, I sat in a quiet law office in Columbus, Ohio, listening to an attorney read my grandfather's will. My grandfather Arthur had been the kind of man who never talked about money. He wore the same brown wool coat for years, drove an old Buick, and complained if anyone spent $10 on coffee. To most people, he looked like a retired businessman living a modest life. I knew better. I just never knew how much better. My mother sat beside me. My 2 children, Eli and June, sat together near the window. My husband Gideon had taken the afternoon off work. The attorney, Evelyn Rusk, adjusted her glasses. "There are several personal bequests," she said. "But the principal beneficiary is Mara." I looked up. Me, Evelyn nodded. She continued reading. "At first I didn't understand what I was hearing. There were investment accounts, commercial properties, shares in a private company, and a family trust established years earlier in my name. My grandfather had not simply left me money, he had left me control." I felt my throat tighten. "Why didn't he ever tell me?" I whispered. Evelyn gave me a small, knowing smile. "Because Arthur believed that knowing too early could change the way people treated you." That sentence stayed with me. Especially when Gideon leaned toward me and asked quietly how much I turned toward him. "I don't know yet." He studied my face. "You must have some idea." "I really don't." He leaned back. For the first time that afternoon, I noticed something different in his expression. Not happiness for me, calculation. I had never seen that look before. After the meeting, we drove home separately because Gideon had another appointment. The next morning, Gideon asked again, "So, what did Evelyn say?" "There's a trust. What kind I don't know yet. We're meeting again next week." He nodded slowly. Then he said something I should have remembered. "You're lucky." I smiled. "So are you. You're my husband." He didn't smile back. Instead he said, "We'll need to talk about how we're going to handle everything." Everything. At the time I thought he meant our future. I was wrong. A few days later, I made a decision that now seems almost painfully innocent. Gideon had a business trip to Chicago. The children and I decided to surprise him. June thought it would be hilarious to show up at his hotel with his favorite cheesecake. Eli wanted to see Chicago, and I wanted to see my husband's face when his family suddenly appeared at the hotel after a long week. We flew out on Friday afternoon. The plan was simple. We would check into a nearby hotel, wait until Gideon finished his meeting, then surprise him at dinner. But when we arrived at the hotel, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Gideon was standing near the restaurant entrance. He wasn't alone. A woman in a navy blazer stood beside him. She touched his arm. He laughed. I froze. Eli bumped into my shoulder. "Mom," I put one hand up. "Stay here," the woman asked. "Are you sure she won't fight you?" Gideon smiled. "She doesn't have the money to fight me." My stomach dropped. The woman looked concerned. "And the inheritance?" Gideon glanced around before answering. "Once the divorce is filed, we'll find out exactly what she has." I stopped breathing for a second. Inheritance, divorce, find out what she has, all in the same conversation. Then Gideon said something that hurt more than anything else. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." I stood behind a column listening to the man I had loved for 16 years discuss the end of our marriage as if he were negotiating a business contract. I looked at my children and realized I had two choices. I could walk into that restaurant and confront him, or I could stay quiet long enough to understand exactly what he was planning. I chose silence, not weakness, not fear. Silence. I took my children back to the airport that evening. On the flight home, June slept against my shoulder. Eli stared out the window. Finally, he asked Mom, "Why didn't we surprise Dad?" I looked at my son. Because sometimes I said quietly, "You learn something important before you're ready to hear it." After the children were asleep, I called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring. "Mara, is everything all right?" "No," I said. Then I told her what I had heard. There was a long silence. Finally, Evelyn said, "Do not confront him yet." "Why?" "Because if Gideon is already planning around your inheritance, we need to know exactly what he has done." I closed my eyes. Then Evelyn said the words that made my blood run cold. "Mara, someone has already contacted my office asking questions about your grandfather's trust." "Who?" Another pause. "Your husband's attorney." I sat alone in the dark kitchen, staring at the refrigerator light. 3 weeks later, that same man would stand in a courtroom and laugh in my face. He thought I was broke. He thought I was frightened. He thought he was divorcing a woman with nothing. He had no idea what my grandfather had left me, and he had even less idea what I had just learned about him. The next morning, I sat across from Evelyn in her office while she spread several documents across the conference table. Outside the window downtown, Columbus moved through another ordinary workday. Cars stopped at red lights. People carried coffee into office buildings. Somewhere below us, a delivery truck was backing into an alley. Everything looked normal. My life no longer was. Evelyn folded her hands. "Before we talk about your inheritance, I need you to understand something." I nodded. "If Gideon is preparing for divorce, you should assume that anything you say about your grandfather's estate could become part of a legal strategy." I stared at the papers. "So he knows there is something. That isn't the same as knowing how much." "No," Evelyn said. "And we should keep it that way." I had never thought of my marriage in terms of legal strategy. For 16 years I had thought of Gideon as the person I called when our children were sick, when the furnace broke, when my mother needed help, or when I simply wanted to tell someone about my day. Now Evelyn was telling me to protect myself from him. It was difficult to accept. "Is my inheritance actually mine?" I asked. "That depends on how the assets were structured. Your grandfather created the trust years ago. Some assets are clearly separate, but we need to document everything carefully." I nodded. Then she slid another folder toward me. "This is what concerns me." Inside was an email. It had been sent to a financial institution by someone representing Gideon. The message asked about the possibility of determining the value of assets held in a family trust during divorce proceedings. My hands became cold. "He's already investigating it." "Yes." I looked at the date. It had been sent 2 days before the will reading. 2 days. I looked up. How could he know Evelyn didn't answer immediately? That's what we need to find out. For the first time, I wondered whether the questions about my grandfather's estate had started before Arthur even died. I drove home without calling Gideon. He was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop open, wearing the gray quarter-zip sweater I had bought him for Christmas. For a moment, the sight of him almost broke my resolve. This was the man I had kissed goodbye that morning. The man who had held my hand during my father's funeral. The man who had slept beside me for 16 years. He looked up. Hey, how was your day?" "Fine," he smiled. "Did you talk to the attorney?" My heart sank. About what? The estate. There it was. I put my purse down. "Why are you so interested?" He closed his laptop. "Because we're married, Mara." That sentence would have comforted me once. Instead, it sounded like a warning. "I don't know much yet." He studied me. Did she tell you about the properties?" "No." "The trust I said I don't know?" He sighed. "You don't have to be secretive with me." I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, because he had no idea how strange that sentence sounded after what I had heard in Chicago. I wasn't aware I was being secretive. He stood. I'm just saying, whatever your grandfather left you, we need to make smart decisions. Why? Because we're a family. I looked toward the hallway. Our children's backpacks were lying on the floor. Their shoes were scattered near the stairs. For years I had believed that word family meant safety. That night it sounded like leverage. I'll let you know when I understand everything I said. His jaw tightened. Fine. He walked away. I stayed in the kitchen until I heard the bedroom door close. That was the first night I locked important documents in a safe. It was also the first night I began looking carefully at the last few years of my marriage. I remembered things I had dismissed. Gideon asking whether my grandfather owned commercial property. Gideon insisting that I sign refinancing documents without reading every page. Gideon becoming unusually interested in my financial accounts after Arthur became ill. At the time I had called it curiosity. Now I wondered if it had been preparation. The following Monday I received divorce papers. They arrived at our house just after 9 in the morning. A process server stood on the porch. Mrs. Whitcomb. Yes, I have legal documents for you. My hands trembled as I accepted them. I closed the door. Then I stood there for almost a full minute staring at the envelope. Gideon hadn't even waited to talk to me. He had filed. The petition requested temporary control over several marital assets and claimed that my financial circumstances were uncertain. There was another phrase that caught my attention: potential undisclosed assets. I sat down at the dining room table. He was accusing me of hiding money while he had already been investigating my inheritance. I called Evelyn. I got the papers. I expected that. Can he take the trust? Not simply because he filed for divorce. The relief lasted about 3 seconds. But she continued, we need to prepare carefully. That afternoon, Gideon came home early. He placed a folder on the table. You should sign these. I didn't touch it. What are they? An agreement to simplify things. Simplify what? The divorce? I looked at him. You've already decided, he shrugged. There's no point dragging this out. Then he smiled. It was the same smile I had seen in Chicago. Confident, almost amused. You don't have the money to fight me, Mara. The room went quiet. Our son, Eli, was standing in the hallway. He had heard everything. Dad, Gideon turned. What mom doesn't need money to be our mom? Gideon's expression hardened. This is an adult conversation. Eli shook his head. You're the one who said she doesn't make real money. Go upstairs. Eli didn't move. I stood and gently touched his shoulder. It's okay. Go finish your homework. He looked at me, then at his father. Okay. When he left, Gideon lowered his voice. You're making this harder than it has to be. I looked down at the folder. No. He waited. You made this harder when you decided my value depended on what you thought I owned. His face changed. For the first time I saw uncertainty, but it disappeared quickly. You'll regret fighting me. I don't want to fight you. I pushed the folder back across the table. I just won't let you frighten me into signing something I don't understand. He left without another word. That evening, after the children went to bed, I sat alone in my grandfather's old study. Arthur had left me the room almost exactly as it had been. His books were still on the shelves. His old brass desk lamp still sat beside the chair. I opened the drawer and found a handwritten note with my name on it. The note was dated 6 months before his death. It contained only a few lines. Mara, people may treat you differently when they discover what I have left you. Remember that their reaction is about them, not you. Protect what I entrusted to you, but never let money convince you that you are worth more than anyone else. Your character was always the inheritance I cared about most. I read those words twice. Then I cried. Not because of the money, because my grandfather had understood something I hadn't. He knew that wealth could reveal people. And now my husband was revealing himself. The next morning I called Evelyn. I want to know everything, she understood. We'll start with the trust. And Gideon. We let him keep believing he knows what he's dealing with. I took a deep breath. For 16 years I had tried to keep peace in my marriage. Now I wasn't trying to destroy Gideon. I was simply going to stop protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. And for the first time since the divorce papers arrived, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I was ready to find out. By Monday morning, the house had become a place where every conversation felt like a negotiation. Gideon stopped asking about the inheritance directly. Instead, he asked questions that sounded ordinary. Did you call the bank? Are you still meeting with Evelyn? Have you decided what you're doing with the property? I answered as little as possible, not because I wanted to play games, because I had finally realized that information was no longer safe in our home. 2 days after receiving the divorce papers, I met Evelyn again. She had prepared a thick binder and placed it in front of me. This is everything we've confirmed so far. I opened it. The first section contained the trust documents. The second contained property records. The third contained investment accounts. The fourth contained correspondence related to the estate. I looked at her. How much is it worth? She paused. We're still verifying the final valuation. Give me an estimate. Evelyn turned a page. Approximately $28 million, depending on the final appraisal and market conditions. I stared at her. 28 million. I had spent most of my life worrying about ordinary things. Mortgage payments, grocery bills, car repairs, school expenses. I had never imagined that one day someone would tell me I was worth more than $28 million. But the number didn't make me feel rich, it made me feel exposed. What happens now? We protect the assets and document where they came from. And Gideon. He can request information through the divorce process. That doesn't mean he automatically receives the inheritance. I nodded. Then Evelyn leaned forward. Mara, I want to ask you something. What did Gideon ever pressure you to sign documents without explaining them? I thought about it. Yes. How often? Several times over the years. Do you remember what they were? Some refinancing papers. A couple of business-related forms. One document connected to a property. Evelyn's expression changed. Do you still have copies? I don't know. Find them. I went home that afternoon and started searching. For hours I went through filing cabinets, old email accounts, tax folders, and boxes in the basement. Near midnight I found a folder I had forgotten about. Inside were copies of several documents Gideon had asked me to sign 3 years earlier. One involved a commercial property. Another authorized financial access to an account I barely used. I photographed everything and sent it to Evelyn. Her response came 20 minutes later. Do not discuss these documents with Gideon. The next morning she called. These may be important. How important potentially vary. She explained that one document appeared to give Gideon broader access to information than I had understood at the time. He hadn't transferred ownership of my inheritance. He couldn't. But he had been trying to position himself to understand what I owned and what he might eventually claim. I sat at my kitchen table. Why would he do this before the divorce? Because preparation often starts before the other person knows there's a problem. I looked toward the hallway. The children were getting ready for school. For 16 years I had thought Gideon and I were building something together. Maybe I had been building. Maybe he had been calculating. That afternoon I received a text from him. We need to talk tonight. Just the two of us. I almost ignored it. Instead, I agreed. He came home around 7. He sat across from me at the dining table. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then he said, I don't want this to become ugly. I almost smiled. You already filed for divorce. I know. You hired a lawyer before you told me. I was protecting myself. From what he looked at me, from uncertainty. I knew what he meant. The inheritance. He wanted to know exactly what I had. You could have asked me. I did. And I told you, I didn't know. He leaned back. Mara, let's be honest. Your grandfather was wealthy. You knew there was money. I knew he had assets. I didn't know what he was leaving me. He shook his head. You always do this. Do what pretend. You don't understand how things work. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, something quieter. Clarity. You've already decided who I am in your mind. He didn't answer. Then he said, I think we should sell the house. No. His eyebrows rose. You don't get to decide that alone, I know, and I think you should sign the agreement my attorney prepared. No. He stared at me. You haven't even read it. I had my attorney review it. His expression hardened. You're really going to make this difficult? I am going to make it fair. He stood. You're going to regret this. I looked at him. I already regret something. What? Trusting you, without asking enough questions. He walked out. That night I heard the garage door close. Then silence. I thought that was the end of our conversation. It wasn't. The next morning, Gideon served a request for financial disclosure. He wanted records of my inheritance trust documents, investment accounts, property valuations, and anything else connected to Arthur's estate. Evelyn wasn't surprised. Let him ask, she said. But what if he gets everything he gets what the law requires him to get? Nothing more. She explained that inherited assets could be treated differently from property accumulated jointly during a marriage depending on state law and how the assets were handled. She also warned me that mixing inherited money with marital funds could complicate matters. That conversation taught me something I wished I had known years earlier. Financial literacy wasn't just about knowing how to save money. It was also about understanding what you owned, how it was titled, and what legal protections applied to it. Then Evelyn showed me something unexpected, a series of emails between Gideon and his attorney. In one of them, Gideon had written, "If the trust is as large as I think it is, we need to move quickly." I read the sentence twice. Then another message caught my attention. "She won't know what she's entitled to. We can negotiate from there." My hands tightened around the paper. He wasn't planning a divorce based on the failure of our marriage. He was planning a financial negotiation, and he believed I was too uninformed to understand the difference. I looked at Evelyn. "What do we do?" She closed the folder. "We let the evidence speak." I nodded. For the first time I understood what my grandfather had meant about people changing when they discovered what you had. The money hadn't changed Gideon. It had simply removed the disguise. That evening I sat with Eli and June while they ate pizza at the kitchen table. June asked, "Is Dad still mad?" I took a breath. "Dad and I are having some adult problems. Are we going to be okay?" I reached across the table and held her hand. "Yes." Eli looked at me. "Even if you get divorced," I nodded, even then. He seemed relieved. Then he asked the question I wasn't prepared for. "Mom, did Dad leave because of the money?" I looked at my children. I didn't want them to grow up believing money was the reason families stayed together. "No," I said gently. "Your father made his choices. The money only showed us what those choices meant." That night after the children went to bed, I opened my grandfather's letter again. "Protect what I entrusted to you." I finally understood. He wasn't telling me to protect the money. He was telling me to protect myself. And I was ready. The first formal settlement conference was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at a law office in downtown Columbus. I arrived 15 minutes early. Gideon was already there. He sat beside his attorney with one ankle resting on his knee, looking relaxed. When I walked in, he glanced at me and smiled. Not warmly, almost triumphantly. I sat beside Evelyn. The conference room was small and ordinary. There was a long wooden table, a coffee machine in the corner, and a framed photograph of the Columbus skyline on the wall. Nothing about the room looked dramatic, but I knew my marriage was being dismantled inside it. Gideon's attorney began. "We're hoping to resolve this efficiently." Evelyn nodded. "So are we." Gideon looked at me. "Mara, there's no reason this has to become hostile." I almost laughed. He had filed for divorce without telling me. He had already contacted attorneys about my grandfather's trust, and now he wanted to talk about hostility. I kept my voice calm. "I agree. It doesn't have to become hostile." He smiled. "Good, but it does have to be honest." His smile disappeared. Evelyn opened a folder. "We have several issues to address." She began with the house, then the vehicles, then the retirement accounts, then the children's expenses. Everything was ordinary until she reached the inheritance. Gideon's attorney leaned forward. Mr. Whitcomb believes the inheritance should be considered when determining the overall division of marital assets. Evelyn answered calmly. We understand his position. Gideon looked at me. You see, I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. I said nothing. His attorney continued. We also believe the trust requires further examination. Evelyn slid a document across the table. The trust has already been reviewed. We want additional records. You'll receive what you're legally entitled to receive. Gideon sighed. Mara, why are you making this so difficult? I looked directly at him. You keep saying that, because it's true. No. What's difficult is that you keep asking for things you already know you can't have. His attorney interrupted. Let's keep this productive. Evelyn nodded. I agree. Then she placed another folder on the table. This concerns Mr. Whitcomb's financial disclosures. Gideon looked confused. What about them? Evelyn opened the folder. In your initial filing, you stated that your wife's financial position was uncertain and that she appeared to have concealed assets. Gideon nodded. Correct. Yet your correspondence with your attorney indicates that you had already been investigating the family trust before the divorce petition was filed. His face changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. His attorney looked at him. Gideon said I was trying to understand the situation. Evelyn nodded. That's reasonable. She turned another page. But then why did you state that you had no knowledge of the inheritance? Gideon froze. I hadn't known Evelyn had this email. She had obtained it through the proper legal process. The room became very quiet. His attorney whispered something to him. Gideon leaned toward the table. I didn't know the exact amount. You knew about the trust, I suspected. You contacted a financial institution about accessing it. I was asking questions. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. That is exactly what the records show. Gideon looked at me. This isn't what you think. I stared at him. I haven't said what I think. He looked away. Then Evelyn opened another file. This is more concerning. She showed the room copies of the documents Gideon had once asked me to sign, the refinancing papers, the property authorization, the account access forms. Gideon's attorney examined them. Evelyn explained that while none of those documents transferred ownership of my inheritance, they demonstrated a pattern of financial preparation that contradicted the picture Gideon had presented. His attorney frowned. Why wasn't this disclosed? Gideon answered quickly. I didn't think it was relevant. Evelyn looked at him. It became relevant when you alleged that Mara had hidden assets. I felt strangely calm. Months earlier, I would have wanted to scream. Instead, I simply watched. Gideon's confidence was disappearing one document at a time. Then Evelyn pulled out a printed email. This one is dated before the will reading. Gideon's attorney reached for it. Evelyn read aloud. If the trust is as large as I think it is, we need to move quickly. Gideon closed his eyes. I looked at him. He didn't look back. The attorney asked Mr. Whitcomb, did you write this? Gideon hesitated. Yes, who were you referring to? He didn't answer. Evelyn did. My client. The room fell silent. I remembered sitting in the lawyer's office when my grandfather's will had been read. I remembered Gideon asking how much. I remembered thinking he was simply curious. Now I understood. He had already been measuring my value. Then something happened that hurt more than any financial document. Evelyn produced another email. This one was from Judith, Gideon's mother. I stared at the screen. The message was short. If Arthur left her the properties, don't let her walk away with everything. Gideon has a right to his share. I read it twice. My chest tightened. Judith had never asked me how I was handling my grandfather's death. She had never asked whether I was grieving. She had asked about property. That was the moment I stopped hoping for an explanation. There wasn't one. Gideon finally spoke. My mother was upset. She didn't understand the situation. I looked at him. She understood enough to discuss what I owned. He had nothing to say. The conference continued for another hour. By the end, nothing was settled. But something had changed. The power in the room had shifted. Gideon could no longer pretend he was the victim of a financially secretive wife. He had created a paper trail, and that paper trail was now speaking for itself. Outside the building, I stood on the sidewalk while cold November wind moved through downtown. Gideon came out behind me. Mara. I turned. He walked toward me. Can we talk? We've been talking for weeks. Not like this. I waited. He lowered his voice. My mother shouldn't have sent that email. No, she was worried. About you. He hesitated. About our family. I looked at him. You mean about your financial future? He didn't answer. Then he said something I never expected. You don't understand what this money is going to do. I almost smiled. I understand exactly what it's doing. What it's showing me who people are. His face tightened. You think you're better than me now? No, I shook my head. I think I'm finally seeing you clearly. He looked down. For a second I saw the man I had married. Tired, scared, human. I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered his words in Chicago. She doesn't have the money to fight me, and whatever sympathy I had disappeared. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. And I knew the truth would eventually reach the courtroom. The final hearing was scheduled for the following week. That night, Evelyn called me. We're ready. I sat at the kitchen table. For what? To present the full financial record. I knew what she meant. The valuation, yes. How much? She paused. The final number is $28.7 million. I closed my eyes. $28.7 million. For years I had thought wealth was something that made people powerful. Arthur had taught me differently. Money could buy options. It could buy lawyers. It could buy time. But it couldn't buy character. And Gideon was about to learn that lesson in front of a judge. The morning of the final hearing, I woke before my alarm. For several minutes I simply lay in bed and listened to the house. The refrigerator hummed downstairs. A car passed outside. Somewhere in the hallway, June's bedroom door creaked as the heat came on. It was an ordinary morning. But by the end of the day, nothing about our family would feel ordinary again. I got dressed in a navy suit and stood in front of the mirror. I looked tired. Not weak, just tired. 16 years of marriage had taught me that there were some battles you couldn't win by being louder. Sometimes you won by staying calm long enough for the truth to become impossible to ignore. At the courthouse, Evelyn met me near the entrance. You ready? I took a breath. As ready as I'll ever be. She smiled. Then remember what we discussed. Don't react to Gideon. Let the evidence speak. Inside the courtroom, Gideon was already seated beside his attorney. He looked confident, almost cheerful. When he saw me, he smiled, that same smile, the one that had once made me feel safe. Now it only reminded me of the night he told another woman that I didn't have enough money to fight him. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered something. His attorney nodded. Behind them sat Judith. She wore a cream-colored suit and carried herself with the same confidence she had shown during our settlement conference. She caught my eye. For a moment she looked away. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The hearing began. At first it was exactly what I expected. The attorneys discussed the house retirement accounts, vehicles, household expenses, and arrangements for the children. Then Gideon's attorney raised the issue of my inheritance. Your Honor, there remain questions regarding the extent and nature of Mrs. Whitcomb's inherited assets. The judge looked toward Evelyn. Ms. Rusk. Evelyn stood. We have provided the requested documentation. She handed several folders to the clerk. The judge reviewed them. These include the trust documents, yes, Your Honor. Estate records, yes. Property records and valuations, yes. The judge continued reading. Gideon sat forward. His confidence seemed to return. He glanced at me. I kept my eyes on the judge. After several minutes, the judge looked at Gideon's attorney. Mr. Whitcomb's filing characterized his wife's financial position as uncertain. That is correct, Your Honor. The judge turned another page. Yet these records appear rather specific. Gideon's attorney hesitated. We believe there are questions regarding whether certain assets should be considered in the division of marital property. The judge nodded. That is a separate question from whether the assets exist. Yes, Your Honor. Evelyn stood. May I clarify one point? The judge nodded. These assets do exist, but the majority were inherited through a trust established by Mrs. Whitcomb's grandfather and were not acquired through the marital partnership. She explained the structure carefully. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no accusations, just documents. That was the strange thing about truth. It didn't need to raise its voice. The judge continued examining the records. Then he looked directly at Gideon. Mr. Whitcomb, did you have knowledge of this trust before filing for divorce? Gideon shifted in his chair. I knew there might be an inheritance. Did you investigate the trust before filing? I asked questions. Through counsel? Yes. The judge nodded. Then your filing's characterization of your wife's financial position as uncertain is somewhat misleading. Gideon swallowed. His attorney leaned over and whispered something. The judge wasn't finished. He picked up another document. I'm also seeing correspondence suggesting you believed the trust could be substantial. Gideon said nothing. The judge looked toward Evelyn. Is there a verified valuation? Yes, Your Honor. Evelyn handed over the final appraisal and financial summary. The judge read it silently. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then he looked up. Mrs. Whitcomb. I straightened. Yes, Your Honor. Are these records accurate to the best of your knowledge? Yes. Have you knowingly concealed any of these assets from the court? No, the judge nodded. Then he turned toward Gideon. Mr. Whitcomb, the evidence before this court indicates that your wife has substantial inherited assets. Gideon remained silent. The judge continued. The verified records place her current net worth at approximately $28.7 million. The room went completely still. I heard someone inhale sharply behind me. Gideon's face changed. The confidence disappeared. 28.7 million. He had known there was money, but he hadn't known the number. Neither had I until Evelyn confirmed it. Gideon stared at me. Not with anger, not even disbelief, with something much harder to describe. Regret. His mouth opened. You never told me. I looked at him. You never asked because you wanted to know what you could take. His attorney touched his arm. Don't. But Gideon wasn't listening. You knew I learned the final valuation last week. You knew this whole time. No, he shook his head. Then he looked toward the judge. So she gets all of it. The judge answered carefully. That's not what I said. Gideon blinked. The judge explained that the existence of substantial inherited assets did not automatically mean those assets were marital property subject to division. Their treatment depended on how they were inherited, titled maintained, and applicable state law. I watched Gideon's shoulders drop. He had imagined $28.7 million. He had imagined a future. He had imagined what he could claim. But the law didn't care about what he had imagined. It cared about documentation. Then I heard a sharp sound behind us. Judith had stood up. 28 million. Her face had gone pale. She took one step backward, Mom, Gideon said. She shook her head. This can't be right. Mom, sit down. She reached for the back of a chair. Her knees buckled. Someone called for assistance. Judith collapsed into the chair unconscious for several seconds. The courtroom immediately shifted into confusion. The judge called for a brief recess. As people moved around her, I stood completely still. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. This wasn't how I had wanted any of this to happen. When Judith finally opened her eyes, she looked directly at me. There was no anger in her face anymore, only shock and perhaps shame. Gideon approached me during the recess. Mara, I turned. He looked older than he had that morning. I didn't know. I know. If I'd known, I stopped him. That is exactly the problem. He looked confused. What do you mean, you loved the life you thought I could provide? You didn't love the person standing beside you." He lowered his eyes. I continued quietly. "You filed for divorce because you thought I was worth less than you. Now that you know I'm worth more, you want to know if there's a way back." He didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The judge eventually returned. The proceedings continued. The financial claims were addressed according to the evidence and applicable law. Gideon's attempt to characterize my inheritance as something he could simply claim was rejected. And when the final orders were discussed, I realized something. I had spent weeks afraid of losing everything, but I had never stopped to ask what everything actually meant. It wasn't the trust. It wasn't the properties. It wasn't $28.7 million. It was my children, my dignity, my peace, and the ability to wake up every morning without wondering whether someone beside me was measuring my worth in dollars. When the hearing ended, Gideon stood near the courthouse doors. For the first time since I had known him, he didn't know what to say. Neither did I, so I walked past him. Not because I hated him, because I was finally ready to walk toward a life he could no longer control. 3 months after the hearing, my life was quieter. Not perfect, not magically healed, just quieter. The divorce had been finalized. The house was no longer filled with whispered arguments or tense silences. Gideon had moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, and we had established a parenting schedule that allowed Eli and June to spend time with both of us. At first, the children struggled. June asked whether we would ever have Thanksgiving together again. Eli stopped asking questions altogether. I learned that children don't always need every detail. They need consistency. They need to know that the adults in their lives can still be trusted to show up. So I showed up. Every school pickup, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, every night June wanted me to check under her bed, and whenever Gideon came to pick them up, I kept my voice calm. "Have a good weekend, you too." There was no affection between us anymore, but there was respect, eventually. One Saturday morning, Gideon arrived early. The children were still upstairs getting ready. He stood on the porch with his hands in his coat pockets. "Can I talk to you?" I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What is it?" He looked down the street. "I've been going to counseling." I nodded. "That's good. I know you don't owe me anything." I waited. He swallowed. "I've been thinking about what you said in court. I knew exactly what he meant. You told me I lost you because I thought you were worthless when I believed you were poor." He looked at me. "I deserved that." I didn't answer. He continued. "I spent years thinking being the one who earned more money made me more important." His voice was quieter now. "I didn't realize how much you were carrying." I looked through the window. June was running down the stairs. Eli was behind her carrying a backpack. I turned back to Gideon. "I'm glad you're seeing it now. I wish I had seen it sooner." "So do I." He looked away. "Do you ever think we could—" He stopped. I knew what he was going to ask. "Gideon." "I know." He nodded. "I know." There was no argument, no pleading. That was one of the first signs that perhaps he really was changing. "I don't want you to hate me," he said. "I don't hate you." "Why not?" "Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life carrying you around in my head." He gave a small, sad smile. "I understand." I believed him, not completely, but enough. Later that afternoon, I visited Judith. I hadn't planned to, but she had called me several times and eventually I agreed to meet. She looked smaller than I remembered. The woman who had once walked into my house as though she owned it now sat quietly at her kitchen table. She poured me coffee. "I owe you an apology." I nodded. "Yes, you do." She looked down at her hands. "When I heard about the inheritance, I thought about what it could do for Gideon. I know, I thought about security, about the future. You thought about money," she nodded. I did. Then she looked at me. "I didn't think about you." That sentence mattered more than I expected. I took a sip of coffee. "My grandfather always said money reveals character." Judith gave a sad laugh. "I suppose it revealed mine. It revealed everyone's." She nodded. "I was wrong about you." "You were. I treated you like you weren't good enough for my son." I looked at her. I know, she wiped her eyes. I am sorry, I believed she meant it. Forgiveness didn't mean I suddenly trusted her. It didn't mean we became close. It simply meant I didn't need to punish her forever for something she had finally admitted. Before I left, Judith asked me something. "What are you going to do with all that money?" I smiled. Something my grandfather would approve of. I had already decided. I would keep enough to protect my children's future and maintain the properties responsibly, but I also wanted the inheritance to mean something beyond my own bank account. With the help of financial advisors and attorneys, I established an education fund for Eli and June. I also created a small family foundation supporting financial literacy programs in local communities. Not glamorous, not flashy, but useful. I remembered how little I had understood about trusts, inherited assets, property ownership, and financial planning before Arthur's death. I had assumed those were things wealthy people worried about. I learned that ordinary families need to understand them too. A will tells people what you want done with your estate. A trust can provide additional control and protection depending on how it is created. And when a person receives a significant inheritance, the smartest first step isn't buying a new house or announcing it to everyone they know. It is getting qualified legal and financial advice. I learned that the hard way. I also learned something about marriage. Love does not mean surrendering financial awareness. Trust does not mean signing documents you don't understand. And being a stay-at-home parent does not mean your contribution has no value. For years I had allowed Gideon's income to become the measure of my importance. That was my mistake. His mistake was believing it too. One evening, months after the divorce, I sat on the back porch with Eli and June. The sun was setting behind the trees. June leaned against my shoulder. "Mom, yes. Are you happier now?" I looked at her. The honest answer surprised me. Yes. She smiled. Good. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think Dad is happier too." I looked at him. Why he doesn't act angry anymore? I smiled. Sometimes people have to lose something before they understand what they had. Eli nodded. Then June asked, "Do we still have to call him Dad?" I laughed. "Yes, sweetheart, he's still your dad." She giggled. For the first time in months, all three of us laughed together. And sitting there, I finally understood what my grandfather had meant in his letter. The real inheritance wasn't $28.7 million. It was the lesson. Know your worth before someone else tries to define it. Protect what has been entrusted to you. Learn enough about money that you cannot be easily manipulated, and never confuse wealth with character. Gideon thought he was leaving a poor woman. He discovered he was leaving a wealthy one. But that wasn't the real twist. The real twist was that by the time the judge revealed my net worth, I had already discovered something worth far more. My own worth. The money changed my circumstances. The truth changed me. And today when I think about that courtroom and the moment Judith collapsed, I don't feel victorious. I feel grateful that the truth came out before I spent another decade trying to prove my value to people who had already decided what I was worth. If this story reminded you of something you've experienced in your own life, take a moment to think about what your own inheritance really is. Maybe it isn't money. Maybe it's wisdom from a parent, lessons from a difficult marriage, the courage to start over, or simply the knowledge that you deserve to be treated with dignity. And if you've ever had someone underestimate you, I'd love for you to share your story in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what another person needs to hear today. If this story touched you, consider subscribing for more stories about family resilience, justice, and the quiet strength it takes to begin again. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't watching someone lose. It's realizing you no longer need their approval to know your own worth.